Dear panelists, dear distinguished guests, dear professors and organizers, today we are together to start panel 9, which is titled China and Central and Eastern European Countries, Vaccine Diplomacy, People-to-People Exchange between China and Eurasia. For the last 2 years, the number one agenda that brought all nations to work together was COVID-19. And unfortunately, the only positive test was very negative for the population, because positive means there is the COVID. And of course, it is a negative issue for all states and all nations. People start to work together despite of their political and infrastructural differences, capabilities, and of course, people-to-people exchange and also people-to-people communication became a great and important role. On the other side, vaccine diplomacy became a topic of research as a different crisis management system. And within this regard, it will be interesting to see and to hear your insightful ideas, research, and also practice from your country's side, how the vaccine diplomacy became capable of solving humanitarian crises, and also how people-to-people exchange between China particularly and Eurasia became a problem-solving component. So the first speaker is Dr. Sanja Arezina, who is the counselor with the government of the Republic of Serbia, research associate assistant professor at Belgrade University of Serbia, AsiaGlobal Fellow, AsiaGlobal Institute, University of Hong Kong, who is going to represent Chinese relations with Central and Eastern European countries in a new era of global transformation. Dr. Arezina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. นุ什们先生们下午好，我很荣幸有机会今天下午跟贵宾参加这个论坛。Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good afternoon. I would like to greet all of you and to thank the organizers for the invitation. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to deliver my speech at this conference. As you heard, my topic is Chinese relations with the Central and Eastern European countries in a new era of global transformation. At the very beginning, I would like to say that China's cooperation with Central and Eastern Europe has advanced tremendously at the bilateral and multilateral level since the establishment of the 17+1 mechanism in 2012, and especially after the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative a year later. Very soon, China gained the status of a friendly country with which every Central and Eastern European country wanted to have cooperation and to be the door for Chinese investment to enter Europe. The exchange of high-level visits and trade cooperation has been enhanced. The amount of Chinese foreign direct investment has increased, and numerous agreements have been signed. However, the strengthening of China treaty theory, certain geostrategic reordering in recent years, and the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in Europe in 2020 have led Central and Eastern European countries to become divided over continuing cooperation with China. Some of them have continued to strengthen their relations with China, despite warnings from Brussels that Beijing is using the 17+1 mechanism as a Trojan horse to enter the European Union through a back door and divide it into the East and the West. These are Hungary, Greece, and Serbia, which have further improved their relations with China in the last few years, especially since the outbreak of the pandemic. The result is an increase in Chinese direct investment in these countries, preferential loans characterized by low interest rate without political conditions, easier procedures for exporting products to China, and significant medical assistance during the pandemic. In 2019, Greece became the 7th member of the 17+1 mechanism. Serbia was the first European country to approve the use of Chinese Sinopharm vaccine and placed a big billboard in gratitude to China with "Thank you, Brother C" in the center of the capital. Guided by the experience from Serbia, Hungary became the first European Union member to approve the Chinese vaccine for use, and cooperation with China was improved in the field of education by announcing the opening of a branch of Shanghai Fudan University in Budapest, despite public protest from the opposition and some Hungarian citizens. Another member of the European Union began to strengthen its relations with China in 2018. This is Croatia, where Chinese companies bought the port of Zadar, started the construction of a wind farm in Senj, and completed the construction of Pelješac Bridge with the co-financing from European Union funds. On the other hand, although China provided very significant assistance during the pandemic to the Central and Eastern European countries, in some of them, such as the Czech Republic, Romania, Bulgaria, and the Baltic states, the intensity of relations with China was significantly reduced. The reason for that is the promise fatigue, which arose due to the disappointment caused by the insufficient amount of Chinese investment in their economies, $1 billion in this region. That is why they began to side with the United States in the strategic competition that this country have had with China since 2017. Also, Washington's accusation of debt trap over Chinese loans have initiated reviews of Chinese investment by some non-European countries in the Western Balkan, such as the last year elected government in Montenegro, which would be willing to review all Chinese investment deals signed by the previous administration. The security problems with Chinese technology that Washington pointed out, primarily mentioning Huawei products, were initiated that the Central and Eastern European countries within the 3Cs initiative gave support for the so-called network initiative. China's assertive policy toward Hong Kong and Taiwan has raised memories of the Velvet Revolution that ended communist rule in Central and Eastern Europe, and the accusation of genocide against the Uyghurs have a heightened negative sentiment among some of these countries advocating for human rights and lobbying within the European Union. Since the 2019, when the European Union named China as an economic competitor and systemic rival, some countries such as the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Lithuania have begun to straighten their relations with Taiwan. Even more, the Lithuanian foreign minister called on the World Health Organization to allow Taiwan's participation as an observer at the organization's International Assembly in May 2020, and announced Lithuanians' exit from the 17+1 mechanism. So it is evident that most of politicians in the Central and Eastern Europe are beginning to politicize the issue of cooperation with China in order to win the elections and stay in power on the wings of the fight for freedom around the world. Chinese wolf warrior diplomacy doesn't help at all in this situation, because it has just caused some high-ranking officials and public opinion to feel that China is more preoccupied with ideological propaganda and ensuring the survival of the regime, that the developing partnership with this by the personal spot between the Prime Minister Andrei Babiš and the Chinese ambassador to the country, Jiang Jianmin, where Babiš called Jiang a liar for allegedly making up statements that the Prime Minister was never uttered. All this leads to the deterioration of relations between these two countries and increasing check activities with Taiwan. In order to somehow appease its Central and Eastern European partners, the Chinese authorities have constantly pointed out that the 17+1 mechanism is not the strategy of divide and rule, but another Chinese bridge to Europe, that China provides support to all non-European Union countries for the European Union membership, and that Chinese investments should be in line with the European Union regulations. At the same time, in order to emphasize the importance of cooperation with this region, in 2020, the Chinese authorities symbolically raised the level of representation within the 17+1 mechanism from the level of Prime Minister to the level of President. And regarding the promise fatigue, perhaps the data speaks best about whether the Central and Eastern Europe has benefited from strengthening cooperation with China. So we can say that China's trade with the Central and Eastern European region in 2020, when the pandemic greatly reduced most of economic activities worldwide, increased by 8.4%, exceeding $100 billion. And during the same year, Chinese FDI in Central and Eastern Europe amounted to $3.14 billion, and the Central and Eastern European countries' FDI in China amounted to $1.72 billion. So at the end, I would like to conclude that in a situation where the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic, climate changes, energy crisis, and food crisis are already being felt anywhere and everywhere in the world. Perhaps we should listen to the Chinese President Xi Jinping's appeal to remain united in these difficult times. And the common sense say that in the period ahead, it is much better to have China as a partner, because according to all estimates, in the coming period, with its economic growth and large market, it will have a great impact on all global trends. Thank you very much, CSCA. I'm looking forward to debate with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a very insightful and interesting approach regarding the diplomacy, the COVID diplomacy as a new problem, as a new issue. And now we're giving the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Marko Savić and Mr. Todor Lakić. Once again, I would like to represent our speakers who actually are representing the University of Montenegro, and they are going to share with us the topic on China and Montenegro, balancing between that, vacancies, and diplomacy. A very, very interesting topic, and we're looking forward to hear and to listen to this interesting topic of discussion. The floor is yours. Please, now you are welcome to share your slides, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parzian, for the opportunity, and sorry for this
never mind, absolutely.
Sharing in advance.
Everything is based on technology, and we're trying to check our immune system on technology. You're welcome.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. We are glad to be here, even in this online version of the conference. Also, my colleague Todor and I appreciate the ability to present the proposal for our scientific article, China and Montenegro balancing between debt, vaccines and diplomacy. First of all, I would like to express the decision behind this topic. We have realized that the China's relations with the Western Balkans or Southeast Europe as a whole is pretty much in a higher level of scientific research than in comparison with these specific relations of one big country on one side and a small country on the other side, as is example of China and Montenegro. Within this scientific article proposal, we separate our research and analysis into the three sections. First of all, we realize that these three sections are main or crucial for analysis of cooperation and relations between China and Montenegro. We will analyze the political, economic, and cultural relations between China and Montenegro in a period after the Montenegro gained or regained its independence in 2006. Within the economic cooperation, we are analyzing the period or relations within the period after the 2010, because that was the year when Montenegro concluded the loan for construction of the very first highway in Montenegro with China. Within the political cooperation, we are analyzing the political significance of the relationship with China for Montenegro, as well as the impact of this relation on China's position in international political relations. In detail, we are seeking answers to the question of whether this relationship is just political or geopolitical or that interest oriented. The decision behind our choosing to deal with these three areas of research is that we could find pretty much a lot of publications from international NGOs and scientific institutes on relationships of China towards the Western Balkans or Southeast Europe as a whole. Also, we have realized that the scientific approach on these specific relations between small country and a big country on a case study of China-Montenegro relation is missing in a way of scientific analysis. Also, these specific relations between China and Montenegro has some broader consequences for international relations system. First of all, a lot of subjects and let's say international community as a whole somehow analyzing the position of China through the analysis of China's impact in Montenegro. On the other hand, for Montenegro, especially this is important because of the responses of our Western allies in the first line from United States and European Union, which are somehow making a role of a watchdog on this cooperation. So we think that it is important to tackle this topic on a political level because of the broader international response and also for the national status or status of Montenegro within the international community. And the third part of our work is dedicated to cultural cooperation. We will analyze the soft power instruments and public diplomacy used by China in Montenegro in several aspects: culture, education, and the special part of public diplomacy that can also be called a vaccine diplomacy or COVID diplomacy in the era of pandemic. Also, within this part of our article, we will analyze the impact of these soft power instruments of the opinion of Montenegrin citizens. So we could compare the status or rank of China within the opinion polls in Montenegro in last several years. So I'm giving the floor to my colleague Todor to go briefly through this economy and politics part of our work.
Okay, thank you, Marko. I hope you all can hear me.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I would like also to express gratitude for the invitation for this conference. When it comes to economic diplomacy, it is one of the most important fields of cooperation between China and Montenegro. Since Montenegro joined the initiative 17+1 several years ago, economic relations between the two countries were established shortly after Montenegro regained its independence in 2006, as Marko said. Economic relations were dominated by trade, with a substantial trade deficit for Montenegro and no concrete measures or efforts to increase the country's exports to China. I would like to emphasize now that Montenegro is most likely next member of the EU and at the same time a full member of NATO alliance as of 2017. That's why this cooperation with China and the period after 2020 gains much more significance. The first major economic project was related to shipbuilding. In 2010, Montenegro agreed a financial agreement with China to allow 2 Montenegrin shipping companies to buy a total of 4 commercial Chinese ships. The culmination of economic cooperation between Montenegro and China was the project of building the first highway in Montenegro ever. The highway construction project is largely being realized. The money was provided by a loan from Chinese banks, most notably from Exim Bank, and the works are also being performed by companies from China, from CRBC. Montenegrin Chinese cooperation on the construction of the first highway was on the front pages of the Western European media last year. The highway has great geopolitical significance for Montenegro because it will connect a small Mediterranean country such as Montenegro with neighboring Serbia and the rest of the Balkans, and further with Western Europe. The loan that Montenegro took from the Chinese banks is large in relation to the gross domestic product of Montenegro as of quarter of gross domestic product of Montenegro and amounts to just over €1 billion with interest. This means that the total loan of Montenegro makes about quarter of the GDP of Montenegro, and at the same time the highway is seen as a part of Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. I should emphasize that Montenegrin economy is largely based on tourism, more specifically on the tourists from neighboring countries and Russian Federation, which makes the economy of Montenegro really fragile, especially in the time of pandemic, such as the last 2 years were. In August 2020, Montenegro experienced the first democratic regime change in its history, and the new government has questioned a loan from Chinese banks as a debt trap that China will use to control Montenegro, and if Montenegro fails to repay the loan, China will take over part of the state property of Montenegro. As an asset that will be allegedly owned by China, the port of Bar was mentioned. The port of Bar is the only port in Montenegro that will be starting and ending point of the new highway. Also, the highway is seen as a part of the initiative One Belt, One Road, and the port of Bar, along with Port Zadar and other ports in the Mediterranean area, have high significance for the maritime Silk Road initiative. The new government in Montenegro announced its willingness to disengage from loans for infrastructure, which is part of Chinese economic diplomacy. And these loans for infrastructure practices the willingness of new government to disengage from these loans practices with China. And at the same time, the government announced its willingness to redefine its foreign policy priorities, openly seeking help from the European Union to refinance its credit arrangements with Chinese institutions. The European Commission initially rejected the proposal to refinance Montenegrin loans, but however, Montenegro's call for help provoked a wide debate across Europe, especially Western Europe and the European Union, leading to some members of the European Parliament publicly asking EU institutions to help Montenegro. Eventually, the European Commission softened its stance and announced it will consider ways to assist Montenegro in its financial commitments to China, not to refinance the loans, since it is quite hard and unexpected, but rather to help with financing the construction of the remaining section of the highway. At the same time, in July of this year, 2021, our government managed to, with the help of the US and European institution, to perform a hedging of the highway loan and thus reduced the interest rate from 2% to just 0.8% for the loan. These events in July took place during the visit of the US Deputy Assistant Secretary, Matthew Palmer, who used this occasion to suggest to his Montenegrin counterparts to be cautious when dealing with China. All the above indicates that the case of Montenegro is interesting because Montenegro is at the same time the most likely next member of the EU, as I said before, a fully member of NATO, but also indebted to China. The attention of the world public is still focused on the further course of events in Montenegro. Our research in the field of economics provides little evidence that China's intentions are bad for Montenegro so far. We base our key arguments on unwarranted criticism that China is pursuing debt trap diplomacy. All empirical data we collected so far confirms that when small countries cannot repay loans to Chinese banks, China would rather approach debt rescheduling or reprogramming than taking over national assets. Also, China is in fact already controlling the port of Zadar, as previous panelists said. So in our research, we did not find the geopolitical significance that the port of Bar or any other property of the state in Montenegro would have for China. Therefore, we recommend researching Sino-Montenegrin relations as a model for future successful cooperation between China and smaller states that are integrated into the Western security and political architecture, but can maintain regular financial relations with China at the same time. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Todor. And for the end, I will just briefly go through this part of the work. This is the third part of our paper about the cultural relations, soft power, and vaccine diplomacy. Analysis start with the analysis of the China's efforts to improve its damaged image after the outbreak of the pandemics. We have analyzed or realized that we could analyze these relations in several phases. The first phase around the April of 2020 could be analyzed through the so-called mask diplomacy, and at the later stage of the pandemic, at the end of 2020 and the beginning of this year, through the vaccine diplomacy. China has donated 30,000 vaccines at a later stage of the pandemic to Montenegro, which indicates the importance of this region along with Montenegro for China's overall geopolitical position in international relations. Later, another 200,000 vaccines were delivered to Montenegro by direct bilateral agreement. For the other colleagues, I have to say that these numbers...
Marko, you have 1 minute to finish due to our time schedule.
Thank you. We should just make this comparison of number of donated and agreed vaccines with just 600,000 inhabitants in Montenegro, so you can see the importance of this cooperation. In a field of education, we will analyze the work of the Confucius Institute and other more than 40 classrooms of these institutes throughout the Montenegro, and also we will analyze statistical data on the scope of educational cooperation between the two countries. Soft power impact of China in Montenegro, we will analyze through the public opinion compared to the real strength of its economic presence. The latest data shows that China ranks second in favor of Montenegrin citizens, just behind the EU and ahead of all other Western countries. This is the main three research questions that we hope so will tackle in our paper. Is economic cooperation with China bringing Montenegro into debt bondage? What is the impact of China's relations with Montenegro on China's status in international political relations? And in what way and to what extent China uses soft power instruments to manage to improve the image of undesirable economic partner. Thank you for your attention, and of course, thank you once again for the invitation.
Thank you too for sharing with us your research and your insightful ideas, and also introducing us the Chinese diplomacy, particularly vaccine diplomacy in Montenegro. And we're going to give the floor to our next speaker, Dr. Pu Jingxin, Associate Professor, Nanjing University of Finance and Economics in China. Dr. Pu Jingxin is going to talk about COVID-19, how can mankind get out of the mire? A very intriguing title. And the floor is yours, Professor Pu. Please introduce your insights.
So now today the topic I'd like to share with you, under COVID-19 situation, how can mankind get out of the nightmare? So okay, now next slide. Yeah. Now, in the face of the ravages of COVID-19, now pandemic, the world needs political leaders of leading countries now to achieve the overall awareness of cooperation to fight the virus now for a shared future of mankind. But actually, we cannot reach such a satisfactory situation. Now, there are still some poor countries need more help from the rich countries. So like the barrier theory shows to us, the capacity of a barrier is always limited by its shortest stave. The content that barrier can hold isn't determined by the taller staves. So in a truly global community with a shared future, not only when you are good and I'm good, and can we all be good, so only by working together and helping each other can we truly fight the novel coronavirus. So, but sorry. Now, because Western powers, especially the United States, now during fight against the pandemic, now they do not play a positive role in the global battle. So now, since the outbreak of the coronavirus, now Trump has failed to control the pandemic at home, now resulting a large number of American deaths and injuries. Now, in order to divert domestic attention, he made groundless accusations against China. So that's really, really unfair to China. And he also demanded compensation from China for the damage caused to US by the pandemic. Now, his actions now not only intensified anti-China sentiment in the United States, but also aroused Asian hate in some parts of the world. So and also Trump played so many cards now to attack China in a wrong way, like now Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and the Taiwan card. Now some Western medias, when they reported China, now I don't think they gave a true fact or based on the truth that happening in China. Now they just want to control public opinions now from their own values and from their own perspectives. So now towards the end of Trump's term in office, now there were signs now that he intended to provoke a military conflict across Heaven Street to have reversed his presidential disadvantage. Now that's his real intention. Okay, next slide. Now, because of American electoral politics, so when it comes to China policy, that means insisting that the current president is too soft on China and promising to take a tougher line once in office. Now, Trump is tougher on China, and Biden's campaign was even tougher than Trump's. Now, for example, he accused Trump of doing a poor job of uniting other allies to pressure China. And if he takes office, he will change this situation. As a result, he stressed the importance of uniting other allies to put more pressure on China, causing new troubles in Sino-US relations. And Biden, we can see, so also is trying to uniting Australia, Japan, and to fight against China. So more in a more fierce way. So actually, Western media and especially American government, and they are uglifying Asians. It is a long-term national policy of the United States. So 90% of US media are controlled by 5 big companies. Now, what people own and have close connection with the government, they indoctrinate and instigate people against Asia. Now, because their values, a combination of missionary zeal and solipsism, the inability even to conceive another way of looking at the world. Now, there is perhaps nothing wrong with democracy as a political system that evolved from Western history and culture. It deserves both respect and serious consideration by others. Now, indiscriminately imposing and supporting democracy anywhere and anytime, however, amounts to a doctor now prescribing Viagra rule to all patients, regardless of their age, gender, symptoms. Ultimately, it may block back against one's own interests. Now, the US is seeing every opportunity to spread China's threat theory around China, stir up anti-China public opinion, and build a closing anti-China alliance. Now, at the same time, coordinate economic sanctions against China with the European Union, Japan, Australia, and other countries to achieve economic decoupling from China. Now, the American media never mentioned fourth trick, but they just holding China hostage on the issue of tracing the source of the virus. It is absolutely unfair to smear China. But American government, they misunderstood China in a lot of ways. So Chinese culture is based on harmony and humanity as continuity. Now, I think it is a new inspiration from Chinese Asian philosophy on the contemporary international relations. Now, the cosmological view of inseparability of one and many is the core of Chinese culture. It is necessary to strengthen the sense of common destiny of mankind with the help of the Chinese philosophy of unity of heaven and man. We are looking forward to the emergence of a new world cultural order with Chinese civilization based on harmony. Now, at Temple University, Professor Swindler put forward in his poem. So we have grouped from dark ages of dictatorial discourse to the age of global dialogue, now which has enabled a new way of thinking for mankind. Now we can no longer turn a blind eye to another or the other. Now in the past, we have always So in the past, we can no longer now we can no longer turn a blind eye to other civilizations. So, and we should take in more civilizations, especially for modern world. Now, harmony is one of the most cherished values in Chinese culture. Now, Confucianism advocates the idea that harmony is the most precious, believing that with their ethical attainments, people can handle affairs properly and create harmonious social relationships. Now, whether Buddhism or Taoism and Mohism, as well as Confucianism, all advocate harmonious relationship between people and between ethnic groups. Now, that is the best part of Chinese culture. We always emphasize harmony now in dealing with people in everyday life and in international relations. Now our public policy is based on now to making more friends, now not to controlling or try to posing our ideas on other countries. Now we increasingly live in a global village. Now we humans cannot live a divided life. We must get together. Now bring our various parts together in harmony with each other. So the last part I'd like to share as thinking in the global pandemic. So when we face the biggest challenge we are facing for our humankind, so first one, we not only struggle for our benefits, we should, when we do something, we should try to realize oneself and realize others. Now jointly constructing a civilization of all under heaven. And also we should live in this world with multicultural coexistence ideas, now harmonious, now symbiosis, and with a sharing future. Now we should respect diversity of cultures, and we should carry out our dialogue and with inclusiveness. Now we should worship nature and the law of nature. Now the pandemic is punishing our human beings because of our desires, because we take too much from our nature. So we should now worship nature and follow the law of nature. Now nature punishes people due to our greedy desire. Now at last, our humankind, we should often make a self-reflection and self-examination. Now to reflect now what we should do now to revert now the pandemic situation, and to welcome a new future for our mankind. Now, thank you for your time and attention. That is now what I want to share with my friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pu, for your ideas regarding harmony and regarding the coexistence of states and different nations. And we are giving our floor to our next speaker, Professor Dr. Olga Zalesskaia, who is representing Blagoveshchensk State Pedagogical University of Russia. And she's going to talk about the interregional interaction between China and Russia in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. When will the Russian-Chinese border in the Far East open? Dear Dr. Zalesskaia, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, and thank you for this opportunity to participate in this conference. And 非常感谢我今天有这个机会参加这个会议。我希望这个会议会加强我们学者的对话交流。Now I need to share my presentation. Russian-China interaction is multilateral and multidimensional and includes relations between the two countries at the interstate and interregional levels. It's currently described as a comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction. In the Russian Far East, Russian-Chinese interaction is a relationship between the neighboring regions of two of the world's major powers. Russia and China cooperate in various areas here, and its border here is for more than 4,000 kilometers. Interregional interaction between the two countries is a major system in the geopolitical Far East, the beginning of which should be dated to the second half of the 19th century. That time, after the delimitation of the territories of the two countries in the Amur-Primorye regions, the colonization by representatives of the two ethnic groups, Russian and Chinese people, began. People established close contacts and jointly developed their uninhabited lands. In the process of contacts widening in the Russian Far East borderlands, the Russian-Chinese cooperation evolved as the territories of Russian Far East in colonization process needed Chinese labor and goods, and northeastern provinces of China experienced Russian influence during the construction of Chinese Eastern Railway, and so on. The closure of the Far Eastern borders at the end of the 1930s led to the cessation of this cooperation, but it was resumed half a century later in the late of the 1980s. The turn of the 21st century is characterized by the development, deployment, and expansion of cooperation up to the beginning of a new time of coronavirus pandemic, when the Russian-Chinese border in the Far East was closed again, and cooperation between the two countries was transferred to new formats for an indefinite period. In general, at the turn of the 21st century, cross-border cooperation has been progressively developing, improving its forms and directions, and this was facilitated by the strengthening of bilateral relations and a new level of interaction between the two countries. Cooperations in trade and economic, scientific and technical, military, humanitarian, and other spheres began to actively develop. The deepening of bilateral cooperation in various fields was promoted by the proclamation and joint holding of national years of languages, and so on. And the border areas of Russia and China have played an active role in this interaction. Their role as subjects of bilateral relations is really great. And trade between the Russian Far East and China has been actively developed. You can see the figures on the slide. And the volume of Far East border trade and then with China is developed. Also, Chinese business operated in the Far East. Chinese citizens came to the Russian Far East as construction and agricultural workers, traders, and cooks in Chinese restaurants. The Far Eastern destination has become popular with Chinese tourists. For example, more than 220,000 Chinese citizens visited the Russian Far East for tourism in 2019. And the number of students and postgraduate students from China studying in a Russian university was 45,000 in that year. Joint cultural events have been held. Some of them have become brands of the border areas: the friendship and hockey on the Amur River, the festivals, Russian-Chinese culture and art fair, and Amur River friendship, and so on. But in 2020, the global community faced a new challenge with the rapid spread of the COVID coronavirus pandemic. And in January 2020, Russian Prime Minister Mishustin signed an order to close the Russian border in the Far East to prevent the spread of the new type of coronavirus. And in February, the entry of Chinese nationals and imports of goods was completely banned. And in March, Russia has restricted the entry of foreigners into the country. So, such unprecedented measures, which had not previously been taken against any of the viruses, SARS, influenza, swine flu, and etc., immediately had a direct impact on the nature of cross-border cooperation. Freight traffic stopped at border crossing points, which resulted in a shortage of Chinese vegetables and a several-fold increase in the price of agricultural products. Dozens of trucks could not cross the border. Later, truck traffic was opened, which solved the problem of shortages of fruit and vegetables. However, other goods in the Far East region were not allowed through the border for more than a year. And the only exception was parts for the gas processing plant under construction in the Amur region. Road freight traffic through Russian-Chinese border checkpoints has been rapidly suspended at the initiative of the Chinese side. Such decisions were caused ultimately by the unfavorable epidemiological situation in China and the worsening epidemiological situation in Russia. Many Russian firms and private entrepreneurs have suffered and continue to suffer losses as they imported goods and components for their business from China. They are now forced to reorient themselves to Russian factories, which offer goods at a price which is at least twice as high, and with a high delivery cost in Russia. Goods with the right characteristics are often simply impossible to find on Russian territory. The situation with the spread of the coronavirus has also seriously hampered deliveries to China of Mire's signature crop, its soya. Trade between the Russian Federation and the North Chinese province Heilongjiang dropped by 23.4% at once in 2020. This was reported by the Xinhua News Agency with reference to the Customs Service, stressing that in absolute figures, the figure exceeds 97 billion yuan, and Russia accounts for almost 2/3 of all foreign trade of Heilongjiang. As for trade between Russia and China in 2020, it reached such figures, and then export from China to Russia increased, but Russian imports to China decreased. And in particular, export to China of Russian natural gas and iron ore, as well as agricultural products, increased. In the opposite direction, there were an increase of shipments, medical goods, electronics, and textiles from Russia to China. And trade turnover between the Russia and Far Eastern China in 2020 increased also. So you see that with the exception of cross-border trade, other areas of Russian-Chinese interaction have been severely affected, as passenger traffic, unlike cargo traffic, has not been restored. The Far Eastern border remains closed to passenger traffic. There has been an unprecedented decrease in the number of Chinese migrants in the Russian Far East, Chinese traders and agricultural workers and construction workers and so on. This has led to the stagnation of these industries in the region. The quarantine has left many businesses in the Amur region without Chinese workers. Local markets have been emptied. The flow of tourists from China to Russia and from Russia to China has completely stopped. The shuttle business, a channel for the delivery of Chinese consumer goods to the Russian population, has been shut down. Dozens of Russian and Chinese citizens have experienced problems returning home. The education sector has also been adversely affected. The Chinese students who left for their home country for the new year in 2020 cannot return to Russian universities in the Far East due to border closures. Russian students in turn cannot get into Chinese universities to study. This means an indefinite continuation of distance learning, which is far from meeting goals of objectives of learning another country language and culture. And joint Russia-Chinese cultural events now only in online formats. They have been indefinitely postponed or cancelled. And for example, events as the annual Russian-Chinese Cultural and Art Fair in 2020 were cancelled completely due to the pandemic.
Dr. Zalesskaia, you have 1 minute to finish.
Okay. And the coronavirus pandemic has made serious adjustments to plans of reforming the region's transport infrastructure, and the constructed Blagoveshchensk cross-border bridge can be put into operation. It is a long-awaited project, the idea for which was originated back in the early 1990s, but now, because of the epidemiological situation, it's currently preventing the opening of the crossing. So, in conclusion, I can say that the closure of the Russian-Chinese border in the Far East due to the COVID pandemic was a defining milestone in the history of Russian-Chinese interregional cooperation. It ended the period of formation and development of Russian-Chinese relations in the Far Eastern border area in traditional formats, when direct communication between the interaction participants, cultural dialogue, and situations of direct communication played a fundamental role. The most sustainable form of cooperation in this case turned out to be the sphere of cross-border trade, due to its socio-economic situation and support from governmental mechanisms. The regional spheres of construction, agriculture, and services revealed the maximum instability and uncertainty of development. The situation is unstable in the field of cultural and humanitarian cooperation. The successful development of contacts in education, science, arts, sport, and tourism is impossible remotely. There is still no question of the possible adaptation to the changed conditions. During the pandemic, when self-sufficiency and the ability to function with a high degree of isolation become a value, there is no place for contacts in the former formats. With the continued closure of the border, established cross-border cooperation is likely to continue for a certain period of time.
I'm sorry to mention that your time is over.
Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to give floor to our next speaker, Dr. Evgeny Kamerman, Far Eastern branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Russia, who is going to talk about the international COVID diplomacy in Eurasia. Please, Dr. Kamerman, the floor is yours.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My speech is about international COVID diplomacy in Eurasia. It's very similar with vaccine diplomacy, but maybe more broadly. In the past 30 years, we have been living in an era of transformations, changes in various areas. After the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the socialist bloc, the processes of globalization accelerated significantly. This led to powerful shifts and transformations in the world economy, global politics and international relations, in the field of states' borders and the emergence of new countries, in the socio-cultural space and spiritual development. The system of international relations is in the process of establishing a new order, which after the collapse of bipolarity experienced a short period of monopolarity in the 1990s and early 2000s, which was subsequently replaced by multipolarity. However, it must be assumed that this state may be temporary and the system will again become bipolar only with new poles. Within this relative chaos and volatility, we also got the year 2020, which produced the first global pandemic in nearly 100 years. The COVID-19 coronavirus made significant adjustments to international economic and political processes, led to the closure of borders for the first time in the post-bipolar period, the cancellation and postponement of global sports and other political forums, economic stagnation, global affair, to a sense of the emergence of new reality. The pandemic has also made changes in the issues of diplomacy and international relations. From mid-2020, we can safely talk about the formation of COVID diplomacy or coronavirus diplomacy. By COVID diplomacy, we mean the international efforts of an individual state or a group of countries aimed at minimizing the threats and risks associated with the coronavirus pandemic and with the side effect of changing the international weight and authority of an actor in international relations. So in the spring of 2020, countries began to provide humanitarian assistance to other states. Russia sent humanitarian supplies to Italy, and even one plane was sent to the United States with ventilation systems. There have been separate initiatives for international efforts in the area of coronavirus. Former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown proposed the creation of a global emergency task force based on the Grade 20 and the United Nations Security Council, with a range of executive powers. This initiative did not receive support since in one way or another it is associated with the partial transfer of national sovereignty to supranational structure. The initiative of Russia, which proposed holding a summit of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council to analyze the causes of the current situation and methods of solving the existing problems that faced humanity in 2020, became more moderate. This proposal also did not receive support, only for slightly different reasons. In addition, Moscow submitted to the General Assembly a draft declaration of the United Nations member states on solidarity in the fight against coronavirus. The main content of the document was the recognition of the main role of the World Health Organization in the fight against the pandemic, the agreement of states to cooperate, providing assistance to the most affected countries, refusal of trade wars and sanctions during the pandemic. The document was not supported by Ukraine, Georgia, the USA, Great Britain, and the European Union. The next step in pandemic within the framework of COVID diplomacy was efforts to develop and further introduce vaccines against the new disease. About 35 countries and academic institutions have participated in this work. By 23rd April 2020, World Health Organization has included 83 drugs in the list of promising developments, of which 6 have already been conducted in human clinical trials. As of February 2021, 69 vaccines were in clinical trials and about 180 in preclinical trials. A typical scenario for vaccine production involves a large number of stages and a duration of 10 to 15 years. However, given the conditions of the pandemic and the need to speed up the process, as well as the fact that there have already been certain developments in related viruses and coronaviruses, the process has accelerated significantly. And the production process and the beginning of vaccination began at the stage of clinical trials. Russia has become one of the leaders in the vaccine production process. Along with the United States, Germany, and China, it became the first country to receive one and began its production and use. And so the vaccine GameCovid-Vac, or another name Sputnik V, is currently actively used on the territory of the Russian Federation. It is who vaccinates the Russian population, and it also allowed for emergency use in 32 countries, and it's not finished. It should be noted that neither the European Union, nor the United States and Canada, not Australia, not even China are included in this list. Of the European states, only Hungary, Montenegro, Serbia, and San Marino. From the countries of Northeast Asia, only Mongolia, and in Asia, Pakistan and Myanmar. China is also in the process of clinical trials, vaccine production, and vaccination of its own population. Beijing also carries out active COVID diplomacy. At the moment, 6 Chinese vaccines are known, the most famous of which is Fosun Pharma. It, along with the American Pfizer vaccine, is the most famous and most frequently used vaccine in the world today. And the German BioNTech is recommended for use by the World Health Organization, approved for emergency use in 22 countries. And unlike the Russian vaccines, these 3 vaccines are approved for full use on the territory of all European Union countries, as well as in Australia, Switzerland, Serbia, Norway, and Iceland. 2 more American vaccines, Moderna and NIAID, as well as 2 British vaccines, AstraZeneca and Oxford University vaccines, are approved for full use in the European Union and for emergency use in more than 20 countries. Of the currently known vaccines, there are also vaccines from India and Belgium, but they have not received any widespread use. And there are also so-called vaccines candidates from countries such as Japan, Australia, Kazakhstan, Cuba, Austria, Canada, and Thailand. If you are talking about increasing the role of Russian political and economic processes in this period, within the framework of its already famous turn to the east, it is necessary to step up efforts in several directions at once. First of all, it is necessary to significantly increase the level of vaccination of its own population. One of the main complaints of World
Mr.
Health
Government, you have
Organization.
1 minute.
Yeah, okay. Against Russia today in the lack of serious success on its own territory in this matter. And my conclusion, the pandemic has created new conditions, a new atypical reality that can seriously affect the dynamics and direction of transformation processes in world politics and economics. And it may have already influenced the balance of power. And now the further development of the situation depends only on the states themselves and their diplomatic skills. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this very brief and very terrific excursus on vaccination diplomacy and issues regarding the acceptance, worldwide acceptance. We'll come in later if we have time for question and answers. And now I would like to invite our next speaker, Ms. Ani Markaryan, a PhD candidate at Nanjing Normal University of China, who is going to talk about the Chinese art of pandemic period as a reflection of its fight against and victory over COVID-19. Please, Ms. Markaryan, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am very delighted to have the opportunity to share my ideas and my research with you today. And I would like to express my gratitude to all organizers of this incredible event. And also I would like to share my screen with you. My research is entitled The Chinese Art of Pandemic Period as a Reflection of its Fight Against and Victory over COVID-19. The new coronavirus COVID-19 has spread to nearly every country in the world since the beginning of the year 2020. Art with its all possible forms and disciplines, visual and performing arts, ancient and contemporary, and without supportive intermediaries, museums, galleries, exhibition, and concert halls gained leading positions in everyone's life in lockdown, as if carrying on its shoulders a mission of enlightenment, evoking humanism, sense of equality, keeping human beings spiritually and mentally healthy in these difficult times. So what happened? What changes occurred in the sphere of art within the first months of pandemic? Museums were closed and seeking ways to stay on board. Digitalized art and art from and art for social media, also the forms of art which could be more or less easily displayed through internet, and artists with a great number of web followers celebrated their temporary victory. Artists challenging the new reality and unwilling to create and communicate with the audience through virtual platforms launched Drive by Art initiative. The online audience became broader. People all over the world were enthusiastic in digging deeply in global art history, finding them, posting, sharing, discussing the artworks which were not well known before, but are quite suitable and penetrating by either their form or content, their context or historical background to express their own emotional state. So you can see the artwork of Edward Hopper, the famous American realist painter and printmaker of the second half of the 20th century. The beloved artwork of people during the pandemic, and also the Renaissance masterpiece, The Birth of Venus, interpreted through the prism of 21st century. All the protagonists are erased to make it more appropriate to the emotional state of the people going through the lockdown. Art definitely had and still has new dominating subject matter, and I would like to emphasize the images of doctors, of course. Artworks accentuating idealized images of medical workers and employees of other spheres who were fighting in the front line for the sake of people's life and health. The implication of this subject matter either feeds the sense of general human triumph over death and evil, or unwraps the professional and personal challenges healthcare workers experience, notwithstanding winning the war due to their high humanistic characteristics. So here you can see Pablo Picasso and Frida Kahlo wearing those protective medical masks, and those masks themselves are works of art too, because they bear the composition of their artworks, the photographies capturing people in self-isolation and communicating with each other through open windows. Also the toilet paper becoming one of the beloved subject matter of 21st century pandemic art. And finally, those artworks that are displayed not in museums, not in galleries, but on the roadsides in open spaces. Doctors' images they have appeared in art throughout the whole global art history. For instance, that statue of the doctor from the ancient Egyptian art, or also the images of doctors interpreted in poster production of Soviet Union, of World War I, World War II, etc. And you can compare them to the freshly made coronavirus art, doctors' images, photography, watercolors, street art, illustrations. And I would like to highlight the specific image. It is authored by an anonymous American artist. It is a two-figure allegorical composition with a neutral background and monumentality of figures, where the Statue of Liberty, the symbol of American and universal freedom, embodiment of the origin, history, and might of the superpower America, is portrayed sick, barely walking with the help of the healthcare female mask-wearing worker. Generalized image of the devoted people saving lives in these uncertain times. Liberty is able to hold only her tablet. The torch, sign of enlightenment and faith, is carried by the medical worker, symbolically and objectively flagging her considerable role as helping hand for the United States. It is remarkable that the Liberty statue is not the first time involved as a compositional motif for propaganda campaign. Nevertheless, the statue has rare depictions in the current form, disparate, exhausted, and in need of support. Coming to the particular illustration of the Instagram artist MJ Heiblem with the general image of the brave doctor and personification or allegory of coronavirus with its cruel and scary characteristics ready to swallow the human figure, one may ask why the artist betook the method of allegorically stressed and detailed depiction of the disease resembling a creature with a human-like face and facial expressions. The clue most likely lies on the purpose to picture the unseen and untouchable, make the invisible visible, and highly impressive and memorable for the audience, accentuating the ruthless nature of the disease, and which is more significant, to spotlight the almightiness of the calm and confident character of the doctor, whose triumph over the evil substance is fatal. And finally, I would like to talk about Chinese perspective. The first known infected patients were recorded in 2019 in Wuhan City, Hubei province. So Chinese art world was the first to react to the total lockdown, mobilization of the medical personnel, temporary closure of factories, schools, stores, and museums. The cultural institutions instantly launched online campaigns with the images of their emblematic artifacts wearing medical masks. However, the laurel belongs to the impressive number of poster art production with distressed images of healthcare workers and employees of the social sector. The majority of the works carries the hidden message of the idea that China would or has already overcome the coronavirus outbreak by its own efforts, highly prepared and organized work of its people. As most of the protagonists are depicted in protective clothing, glasses, and gloves, on one hand, pointing the high level of the Chinese authorities and institutions' readiness on responding to the disaster, there is no way to speak on individual characteristics and identified personages, merely general representations, symbols, metaphors, and allegories to form the collective image of the virus confronting force, heroic medical personnel. The specific difference from contemporary art of Europe and United States with the pandemic subject matters is the extensive engagement of Chinese cultural and folk elements, food, architecture, garments, masterpieces of Chinese traditional art. The motifs based on the images of tractors and cranes with the workers indicate the occasion of building a hospital in Wuhan in only 10 days, admired by the international society. The The theme with the doctor kissing her child or husband through the protective glass highlights the sacrifice and the high price medical staff is paying for prevailing the pandemic, at the same time hinting the case that they are not supernatural beings with special attributes, but humans with all the best human characteristics, such as devotion, deep knowledge and experience, bravery and patience. Even if they are comprised in compositions with metaphoric structure, they are still portrayed with highly humanistic features, emitting the concept that real heroes of pandemic period are not imaginary almighty beings one can see in European and American nowadays cartoon production, similar to the personages of computer games or fantasies, but real, ordinary, recognizable, next-door people confronting the real threat with the strength of their heart and mind to fight till the very end. The illustration with the rows of medical workers forming the burning candle is noteworthy for the peculiar arrangement of details in centralized composition with the best traditions of symbolism, which could provide a number of contextual interpretations. A tribute to the medical staff who sacrificed their lives, burned as a candle for the sake of people's health and safety. B, medical workers forming the living fortification in front of the virus, and the fire as the symbol of desperate fight, the extreme level of pressure and tension. And finally, C, the burning candle as the symbol of life on the earth, based on the shoulders of healthcare workers. Another interpretation of coronavirus outbreak by Liu Xiulin, with a close-up view, physical distortions done on purpose, feeling of incompleteness, emotionally drawn lines and strokes of expressive faces and radiating eyes on us profoundly affect the audience with a mixture of feelings. We do not know them and perhaps we won't ever recognize them, but the pain, confusion, strength in their eyes and facial features, their scars are apparently catharsis for us, the viewers. They are indelible for our memory for long as insignia of the humans going through coronavirus pandemic. Effectively using the social media platforms of WeChat, Weibo, TikTok, QQ, Chinese cartoonists were spreading their own vision of the pandemic. Some of them have an exciting narrative behind. The crowded composition of Chen Xiaotao tell the story of the start of the outbreak, cure and victory over the virus, with the detailed allegorical figurines in the form of Chinese cuisine, most representative dishes of different provinces. Mission to support
Irani, you have 1 minute to finish.
Of this vast country. Jointly fought the disease with no despair. Among the crowd, one can notice the general images of medics, military figures, workers side by side, showing their care to the infected patient. There is also a petty but significant detail uncovering typical Chinese manner. The small figure of the doctor is intendedly depicted from the back so that the eyes of the audience could catch the flowers on her protective cloth. It is the reflection of the real story when in one of the Wuhan hospitals, an elderly patient expressed her gratitude to her doctor for painting floral ornaments on the latter's medical uniform. And I would like to share with you also some images related to racism and xenophobia, where the Chinese flag is interpreted with the emblem sign of coronavirus, the vandalism of the Chinese guardian lion at the gate of Chinatown in Vancouver. Also artworks as calls against discrimination and racism. And finally, my conclusion, in comparison with the Western art reactions to the global disaster as a catastrophe parallels with the epidemic outbreaks of the past, Chinese artists rather represented the process of the fight against the invisible enemy. The other distinctive trait of the Chinese art was representing the disease as a request for unity. The Chinese art world emphasized the importance of following the rules, laws, and regulations of the pandemic. Chinese art of pandemic has employed a variety of symbols, signs, detailed, and elements inspired by Chinese folk culture. The characters of Chinese celebrated cartoons, anime movies, and illustrative art were largely incorporated into coronavirus-related compositions. Although the image of medical and social workers was idealized, the hard work, sleepless nights, and pure devotion to their mission were the true human underlined features of those characters depicted by Chinese artists. And finally, a number of Western street art forms and illustrative art pieces have used the visual language of xenophobia and racism, representing the coronavirus as, in quotes, Chinese disease. The Chinese art world was apparently more humanistic without nationalizing the virus and linking the pandemic to any particular ethnic group or state. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear Markarian, for giving us the viewpoint on an art perspective. And in line with diplomacy, politics, we also discussed the impact of coronavirus and the vaccine diplomacy in art. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Professor and also Dr. Songli Lei, who is introducing Tongji University in Shanghai, and also Pan Jingke, right, a PhD student from Heidelberg University of Germany. The topic of their speech today is the soft connectivity between China and Europe, and people-to-people linkages should never be ignored. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for inviting me to join this conference. Pan Jingke is my former student for the BA studies. Now she is in Germany. I, on behalf of her, to share opinions with the audience here. Welcome your comments and suggestions. And people-to-people communication is one of my research as the China-EU, the third pillars for the communications. And for our research here, we will review from the 2012, what is the high level of the people-to-people communication between China and the EU cooperation. And then we will given the definition of what is a soft connections. In the third part, we will share with you the case studies about this HPBT cooperations, and then have the final conclusion. And in the first part, we will have the short review of the China and the EU, this Eurasia connectivity research. It is known that China is one of the important partner in the China-EU relations. It is known that from the 2013, when China's Belt and Road Initiative is mentioned, it is have many related research, but for the connectivity topic, is still not enough. And when we have the quick review of the literatures from the Chinese scholars, it is can find that the common perspective for Chinese scholars to do this research is that on the complexity of the this EU mechanism and its complex on the China-EU connectivities. And in the second hand, a lot of studies is undertaken on the EU-China cooperations under the Belt and Road Initiative. And the third side, the European Union Railway Express is another topic attract many discussions and in-depth research. Now, finally, it has proven for the scholar to analysis the underlying risks for the BRI construction in Europe. And for the European studies about this China-EU connections, in terms of this opportunities and challenges, it has many detailed discussions, but the different member states, they hold a different perspective and attitudes, and they talk about this divergence. And it is known that the EU institutions on the whole and the member states as separate, they have the different priorities when talk about Belt and Road Initiative. And when we have the definition for these connectivities, it is can found that first, we can review from the 10 years ago, the Association of the South Asian Nations, these ASEANs, they have firstly proposed about this connectivity. they mentioned that they will strengthen these connectivities among the ASEAN themselves. It is called first talked in the sub-regional areas. And when China talk about these connectivities, it is important not to talk about these infrastructure connectivities, but it also included some soft levels. That means the people communication. So we have here divided into the hard and soft ways. And when we talk about this soft connectivities, it's usually included this policy connections, the rules, the systems, and the high-level connections in the and the different levels of the actors. It is not only the member states and the EU institutions, but also the local government, the companies and the NGOs, even some sub-regional cooperation areas. And for the for the characteristic for the Chinese styles of connectivities, and it is known for the 3 keywords. First is the consolations, and the second is contribution, and the third is shared benefits. It is from Chinese side, it's a golden principle for talk about this connectivity. And it is known to us, there are many uncertainties and challenges in the EU and China connectivities, but it is nice for this year in our in October this year, Chinese President Xi Jinping himself has phone conversations with the President of European Councils. They have pointed out that China and EU, they should explain this area of the practical cooperation and promote this Belt and Road Initiative that is coordinating with the EU's global connectivity initiative. That is on high-level cooperation, once again, to concern this willingness. And for the China's connectivities and the EU's connectivities, I think the soft connectivity areas is very important. It is known that when we talk about these cultures, the cultures, it can play a very important roles in enhance its understandings. So here we will analysis in the past 10 years, this high level of the people-to-people communication dialogue, what is the role and how it is play as the important way for soft connectivity between China and the EU. Here is a many case here. We will be very short, such as in education areas. There is the dialogue based on the education cooperation mechanism that is included 5 components. One of the eminent site is Erasmus Plus, that is promote and the Chinese students and scholars to go to Europe. And for the technology areas, here we can see that the policy dialogue including the 2 dimensions. The first is that EU and China innovation cooperation dialogue, and the second is about this dialogue hosted by the local government and the civil society institutions. For the sports, here we also can find about the culture and the sports. For the sports areas, from the 2020 and this HTTP framework, this China and the EU, they have great expand this international sport corporations and Erasmus Plus framework. That is the newest progress. And for the genders, they have already emphasized the importance for the exchange of ideas and project cooperation between China and the EU young organizations in the field such as climate change. And for the genders, the this gender equalities is also one of the important goals for the sustainable development between each others, and it's become the new topic between China and the EU people-to-people dialogue. And consider the time is limited, I will jump into my conclusion here. In my understandings, China EU, they should understand this importance of the culture and communications between the two sides. It is very important to unite the peoples in the Eurasia continent in the cultural ways, and it will finally it will in this faster change world. And the second, we can find that China and Europe, they have established this well-structured people-to-people and cultural interconnection mechanisms. And in certain areas, the EU is have the willingness to build these softer connectivities and also play a very active roles for the cultural exchange programs. And in last but not the least, considering this global pandemic, you also recognize where we have the difference in norms and values between China and the EU, but they should find some ways to promote mutual understandings and find the common interests for the sustainable development. And on this point, I think the cultural linkage, and especially from the people-to-people communication framework, is never should be ignored. And I hope I can save my time. Welcome your comments and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is very hard and very deep information and research that you have done on your side. Thank you very much. And we're passing our floor and microphone to Dr. Nare Haroyan, who is an alumna of Shanghai Normal University of China. And today she's going to represent interpersonal conflicts between different cultural individuals at multicultural workplace. And she has a case study that was developed and maintained in China. Dr. Haroyan, the floor is yours. Please start.
Hello, everybody. I would like to thank for the opportunity and quickly start because some of you, it's already like 11 p.m. at night. So today I will quickly talk about interpersonal conflicts that happen to be at multicultural workplace between different individuals who work together. Just quickly, I would like to say what I will be talking about. I will introduce a multicultural workplace, and then I will talk why culture is so important. And mostly I will focus on out-group interpersonal conflicts and how manners and face affect the conflict. Second part, I will introduce my 4 studies, and after I will conclude the study results and the contribution of this study to the thing. So those of you who lived in China and experienced big cities like Shanghai, they know that most of the companies are multicultural workplaces where people who represent different culture can have more conflicts than if you share the same cultural background. And why cultural context is so important? Because studies have identified 2 different types of cultures, like individualist cultures. For example, I am Armenian and I represent individualist culture where the information is not coded. However, some cultures are collectivist culture, like Chinese and other East countries, where the information is highly coded. Because the conflict concept is pretty wide, I will today focus on intercultural conflict, which means that people have conflicts when my cultural worldview is different from your cultural worldview. And this is my study focus is basically on. And another focus is out-group conflict. What does that mean? It means that in cultural settings, I used to have conflict more with my foreign colleagues than I would have with the colleague that shares the same culture. And well, here we will also focus on different conflict styles because studies reveal that people from individualistic cultures and people from collectivist culture. They use different conflict styles when it comes to cultural background. And this is the most important part that I'm going to focus, that nobody ever focused but my study. Based on my experience in 10 years in China, I realized that the manners in which we communicate can raise conflict. For example, I might use direct communication style or confrontation, and it can be an issue with my Chinese colleague. And lastly, we all are aware of the concept of face, Chinese 面子, which is the positive image about ourselves. And this concept is very important in Asian culture. However, that concept is not very important in individualist culture. Let me quickly go to my research. So the purpose of this study was to focus on the factors that affect in the workplace between Chinese and foreigners who work together. We wanted to understand what's that key point that affects conflict. Is it the way we perceive conflict? Is it like the way we manage conflict? Is it the way we see our face in the conflict situation? In this respect, I have 4 hypotheses. In the first part of my study, I wanted to understand, is the same situation, let's say, if something I view conflict, is it a conflict for you? After I view the situation as a conflict, how I manage that, and how manners and face affect our conflict situation. I would like to share some statistical data. So my first study has 2 parts. In the first part, I was collecting conflict scenarios from 13 Chinese and 30 foreigners. I asked them to explain the situation that they think is a conflict and that situation should 100% have a cultural context. After I got the 40 scenarios, I asked the second group of the people, 50 Chinese and 50 foreigners who work in the multicultural workplace, to rate this situation. And this is the data, which is very, very interesting. I would like you to pay more attention on the data. The conflict situation that were given by Chinese colleagues were rated higher by other Chinese group of people as conflict situation. And the ones that were given by foreigners were rated higher by other group of foreigners. But if you see the numbers, this is very, very important. I want to make you pay your attention here. Chinese rating is much less than foreign rating. Why? Because this is concluding that Chinese people, I just noticed Ms. Pu, Dr. Pu was pointing that Chinese people value harmony and dislike social disagreement. That's why, even though they said this situation is conflict, but it's still, their rating is much less. For example, if I ask them to rate from 0 to 5, their rating was mostly 3. But for foreigners, it was always higher. And I would like to go to my second study. We all know that conflict styles different from different culture. But I wanted to know, when you have a conflict with other culture, do you still use the same conflict style, or it is also different? And my first result is kind of okay. Like both Chinese and foreigners at workplace, while working together, they use like integrating conflict style. But this is the result that, again, was something new in the research field. When I put the experience of working years as a variable, we found out a very outstanding result here. So the more Chinese and foreigners work together, the more the way they copy with conflict is different. For example, with the increase of working years, we see that Chinese use less avoiding style and foreigners use less dominating style. So my hypothesis was once again confirmed that when you have even though if you have conflict style within group, it can differ from out group, and working experience has a huge effect. It means that the more we know each other, the more we are aware of the culture, the more productively we resolve conflict. This is the study that I have done that was very difficult, and I couldn't find other studies to support it, but it's okay. My research could be the first one. It's about manners. Here I have 100 foreigners and 100 Chinese who participate in this study. And I gave them 2 scenarios and I asked them to rate. In these scenarios, mostly it is about manners, like if this could be a conflict or not. And we see from my results that direct manners that are expressed by foreigners can cause conflict with Chinese co-workers. And meanwhile, indirect manners that are expressed by Chinese can cause conflict with their foreign co-workers. Thus, in cross-cultural settings, it is extremely important to pay attention on the manners, the way you talk, the politeness, especially when it comes to communicate with Chinese people. And lastly, this is about face. I have several variables here, but because for Chinese people, like face is most important, I will only share the results from the face. The results here showed also very important that in general, when Chinese people work with Chinese people, the most important thing they care is about other face, not them, myself. But foreigners mostly say me, me, me. Even in our culture in Armenia, we like to say I more than we. However, while Chinese people start to work with foreigners a longer time, they pay more attention on other face than on their own face. So this is also a very outstanding result that I have found. We can see that the working experience is very important because the more you work with China, the more you understand the culture, and same for Chinese people. I would go to my conclusion. So the results, as we see, conflict, something that I might consider conflict, you might not consider conflict. That's why we appear to have conflict. This is the first result. The second study shows that the more working experience increased, the more we change the way we copy with our conflict styles. The third result was very important. It's about manners, that we should always take care of the manners we communicate during out-group team members. And lastly, it's the face. We have to understand that Chinese people care about the face. However, during the years of working experience, this can change. And the contribution this paper has can widen our cultural awareness of understanding out-group interpersonal conflict, and this can help us to manage workplace diversity and input to develop effective working relationship between Chinese and foreigners at multicultural workplace. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harya, for sharing with us your insightful ideas and research. The results are really very impactful, and I think that this is how we can observe and make a research on each other and understand how to cooperate in a better way. I think that the research and the investigations that have been done during different projects that were under cover of this panel give us again chance to consider about collaborative perspective of the humanity, particularly in worldwide crisis situations. And COVID-19 pandemic was a kind of crisis test for people all around the world, how they manage the crisis on a national level and how they can manage if they are very open for collaboration and cooperation. We'll go quickly with the questions and see whether we have questions from our audience. If you have any questions, you can raise hands and we will see, or you can write your questions in a chat group and we will read for our panelists. Meanwhile, I would like to ask a question to our panelists, and the floor is open to those who would like to reply to that. When we talk about vaccines that were mostly boosted and donated from China, and they are made in China vaccines, and within this vaccine diplomacy, do we see people-to-people conception of accepting China as a more responsible superpower, and whether it is considered among the state nations to accept China as a responsible power, particularly in one crisis situations? I would like to see whether something is changing in specifically your countries, or whether you see the change within the countries that you consider as a case study. So I would like to listen to our panelists' ideas regarding this topic. If you would like to reply, you just can take the advantage of our technology and just start talking immediately. Okay, so yeah, I see Dr. Arezina is going to talk about this here. The floor is yours, please, welcome.
Yes, I'm coming from Serbia, and Serbia has a strategic partnership with China from 2009, and very deep strategic partnership from 2016. So we are very, very close partners, and I can say friends. Friendly countries, so we could see that during the pandemic, since the outbreak of the pandemic, China helps to Serbia a lot, not just Serbia, but whole Western Balkan region, and we are very grateful to them. China opened one part of their production for vaccines, for Sinopharm vaccines in Serbia, and it's very important for Serbian leadership and Serbian citizens in this hard time. But these kind of activities, Chinese activities, can show us that China is really a responsible global actor. And I think that they want to represent themselves like very responsible partner to whole world, but obviously we can see that since the outbreak of the pandemic, we could see lots of negative rhetorics about China. They coming mostly from the US, but also from the European Union. And of course, everybody can say what they want, but you know, I saw one thing since the outbreak of the pandemic. I like to say, and I just heard Chinese President Xi Jinping from the beginning. They always say, they always appeal for solidarity between and among all states in the world. And from other leaders, I just heard some divided opinions and some negative thoughts, and I think that's not good in this hard time. I think that we all, as I concluded in my speech, we all should be we are all together in the same problem, and we should be solidar in finding solutions to overcome these problems.
Thank you very much. Cannot agree more. Thank you. Do we have any other response regarding this question? Yes, please. Todor, Lakić, please.
Yeah, hello. I would like to add something else from the experience of Montenegro. Vaccines from China, vaccines produced by Sinopharm, were one of the first vaccines that Montenegro received, and this contributed to the better status of China among Montenegrin public opinion. Over 60% of those vaccinated in Montenegro are vaccinated with the Chinese vaccine, and the general opinion of the public in Montenegro is that Chinese vaccines are more reliable than vaccines from the West. People in Montenegro are generally attracted to the traditional way of making Chinese vaccines using the inactive virus method in comparison with the mRNA vaccines on the West. Also, during the 2020, all the researches of the public opinion show that citizens of Montenegro see China as the second most favorable nation in the world when we talk about great powers, which is kind of strange since Montenegro is known for its traditional ties with Russia and its traditional pro-Russian opinion, public opinion. But at the same time, Montenegro is a reliable partner and a member state of the NATO and a candidate for the European Union. So it shows that how mighty is vaccine diplomacy and how mighty is soft power in the case of Montenegro when we talk about most recent times, especially COVID pandemic era. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really very interesting to know about that, and I think that it's important to understand what the politics says, but in reality, how in different situations the people can change their ideas and conception of specific states and regions. Particularly, you are talking about superpowers or those who are becoming superpowers. I would like to ask whether other panelists also would like to reply to this from their perspective. Okay, so then I would like to close our panel, and we have, this panel is also blessed to close the ceremony, to have the closing ceremony of the whole conference, because we're the last panel, and it's my pleasure to give the voice to the organizing member of this nice conference, Mr. Dr. Sahagian, to close the conference on an official level. Thank you very much, dear panelists. It was my pleasure to communicate and to listen to your insightful research, and I wish you success, and I'm looking forward to read more about your research. Thank you very much. Mr. Sahagian, please, Dr. Sahagian, the floor is yours.
Dear friends, thank you very much for your very interesting and important speeches. I enjoyed these 2 years, and I have got from you energy and great knowledge. I want to thank also Russian Armenian University for hosting us. I want to thank Chinese Embassy to Armenia for supporting this event. And I want to thank all friends, moderators, keynote speakers, all of you, that you have found time, that you have been with us, with your questions, with your important speeches, contributions, and thank you. I am very thankful, and it was a teamwork. This conference is a teamwork, and we could show that multilateralism is possible to use, and nations, scholars can find ways for solving different problems, because during the speeches, most of you introduced concrete recommendations how to solve many problems, and concrete recommendations how to build bridges and how to cooperate with each other. So I am very thankful, and I want to remind you that our main goal of this conference to publish another new book. Here you can see our book, China and Eurasia, Rethinking Cooperation and Contradictions in the Era of Changing World Order. So we published it this year after 2 conferences, China-Eurasia conferences, and I hope, and I am waiting for your papers, that we all together publish new book at Routledge, and I will wait for your chapters. If someone wants to say something, I will be happy to give a floor. If no, I can say goodbye, and please follow our page, China-Eurasia Council for Political and Strategic Research at Facebook. We have already established WeChat group for those who cannot use the WeChat, and we also can interact with each other in Twitter. But once again, our main aim is to publish new books. So please prepare your chapters. Thank you.